I'm Autumn Lockett.
And this is Mitch Randall.
And you're listening to Good Faith Weekly.
Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. And on this episode, Autumn and I are going to catch up after her day off. And then we're going to talk about three very important topics. We're going to talk about what's going on at the Olympics with the greatest of all time, gymnast Simone Biles. We're also going to take a look at what we heard this week from the United States Capitol in the hearing about the January 6th insurrection. And then also, we cannot stop talking about COVID, unfortunately. Later on in the pod, Autumn and I sat down with the executive director of Food and Shelter Incorporated right here in Norman, Oklahoma, as we are really dealing with the increase in homeless population. So it's a really good interview. You want to stay tuned for that.
I'm Reverend Starlette Thomas, a womanist in ministry and the host of the Raceless Gospel podcast from Good Faith Media. It's season 2, and we're still talking about that taboo trinity: race, religion, and politics. This season of the Raceless Gospel has 8 episodes, 8 podcast church services. The doors at this church are open, and we're going to talk about the sticks and stones we carry faithfully that break the skin and bones of Christ's body. And on each episode, we're joined by those who bring perspective and insight as to how we set these broken bones and perhaps make things right. The Raceless Gospel Podcast, 8 episodes. I'm your podcast pastor, Reverend Starlette Thomas. Join us as we discuss the church in North America's bodywork. Learn more at goodfaithmedia.org.
Autumn, you had a day off this week. Tell me all about it.
Well, Mitch, I had a day off from Good Faith Media. I had a day very much on being a mom. Our oldest is out
do
of town
tell.
Yeah. Our oldest is out of town for a couple of weeks doing some giant camping situation. And so I took our 3 youngest to a museum for the day, a children's museum. And it was great. It was an adventure. And I'm excited to be sitting at my desk recovering today.
You mean, 3 kids at a museum running around wasn't relaxing?
It was super. It was very fun. It's just a different kind of energy. Like, they don't wait patiently like emails do. Like an email will wait an hour for you to respond. A child will not at all. But yeah, it was really fun. I just kind of needed a little mental health break, and the kids are out this week, so I decided to take a day and spend with them.
Well, good. Well, I'm glad you took care of yourself. That is very important. We encourage self-care around Good Faith Media. Speaking of self-care, a lot of news coming out of the Olympics this summer in Tokyo. Gymnast Simone Biles withdrew from the competition, citing mental health reasons. And this story has gotten a lot of play in public media. Unfortunately, she's been criticized by some morons out there for not being able to suck it up, pull herself up by her bootstraps, just the ridiculousness of moronic type of thinking. But I applaud Simone. I mean, she's got to take care of herself. And, there's a lot of pressure on these athletes to do well. And when you are the greatest of all time, like Simone Biles is, and I mean that in all earnest, because anybody who is so good that they're not going to give you full points for your routine is just crazy good. So a lot of pressure on her. So I applaud her in taking care of herself.
Absolutely. And, I'm sure it's the pressure of the games and being in the Olympics. I can't imagine that kind of spotlight, but she's also been through a lot. She was sort of in the middle of the sexual assault and harassment situation that happened with their coach and the doctors and all that business. And she's continued to, practice the sport that she loves. But I also applaud her. And I think we've all probably had those times where one of 2 things happened. Either we kept going when we probably shouldn't have, and had to deal with the results of that, and when we actually listened and took a break. And so I feel like the folks that I respect are really holding that space for her and commending her for knowing when to say when.
Absolutely. Because it could have easily gotten to a point with all the pressure that she is under, as well as a lot of our other athletes. But her, especially with what's going on, as is exactly what you said as you detailed that, there could have been a time where she decided to end it all. And we've seen athletes do that. We've seen young
Hmm.
people give in to the pressure and decide they just can't live any longer because of it. And I am so happy that people are talking about mental health, making mental health a priority before they get to that point. And
Yeah.
so kudos to her, kudos to everybody who is in therapy now, taking care of themselves, taking days off like you did this week. We just is so important, and we encourage it any chance we get.
At Good Faith Media, we do a lot of talk about advocacy. We really amplify folks who are advocates. But while you're advocating for others, you also have to advocate for yourself. So just wanted to give a little shout out to all of our people of faith who feel like they're, trying to fix the whole world. Make sure that you attend to your own needs as well.
Speaking of advocating for yourself, 4 police officers were
Mm.
invited to the United States Capitol this week as hearings got underway about the January 6th insurrection. These officers have been walking the halls of Congress, trying to meet with congressmen, success in some halls, not so much success in other halls. Listening to their testimony this week, Autumn, uh, what what stood out to you?
I think none of us realized what we were watching on January 6th. I'm a little bit of a news junkie, nothing like you. I just have the one screen for the news. um, but on January 6th, I was working on one screen, and then on my phone, I think I had the election results. Right, that's what we were watching. They
Yeah,
were
they were certifying
verifying
the election.
certifying the election. Okay, a lot has happened since then, and so I just kind of had one eye on it, and I was like in the middle of an email and watching just people start pouring in, and you could tell from the energy that it was something different, but I don't think any of us realized what a powder keg that situation was and could have been so much worse.
Yeah, it was. And hearing the firsthand testimony from these officers, it just goes to show you how brave they were that day. They held the line, as Adam Kinsinger suggested in his response to their testimony. They need to be applauded. They need to be celebrated as heroes, and
Compensated.
absolutely, because many of them still suffer from
Yeah.
that day, whether it's injuries, either mental injuries or physical injuries. They're continuing to suffer from the events of that day. And everybody who was attacking them, who was part of that insurrection, needs to face the fullest extent of the law.
Mhm.
Justice needs to rain down, as the Bible says. And I was just gripped, and I wiped away a tear along with Democrats and Republicans who were hearing that testimony, the congressman in the room, and it's just heart wrenching. And it's going to be interesting to see what else is revealed during these hearings. My fear is that there's going to be some complicity by some of
Mhm.
the lawmakers prior to the insurrection, and it it's heart wrenching as an American and what we stand for. And my hope is that if there was collaboration regarding the insurrection, that anybody involved in it, in the planning and the carrying out of that mission, will face justice. And so we're about to find out.
Yeah, and it's just important not only for justice for what happened, but also to put a stop to any future plans like this. We've got to carry out that message that this is not going to stand. Like, you cannot pull shenanigans like this. I don't care what your motivation is.
Mhm.
It's not okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of motivation, Autumn, we cannot stop talking about COVID 19. We talked about it last week, had Dr. Amber Schmidtke on, always a great guest, telling us about the COVID Delta variant. But numbers are increasing. We're starting to see mask mandates initiated once again across the country, and they're calling this the pandemic among the unvaccinated. and it's terrifying.
It really is. I posted something last night from Owasso, which my Oklahoma geography isn't great. Mitch, is that near Tulsa?
Owasso, Oklahoma is north of Tulsa, Oklahoma,
Okay, I
which
thought it was
is
like
east of Oklahoma City, which is north of Dallas. So for everybody listening, on the
north of
coast.
Dallas, south of Chicago. Okay, that's where we are right now. But we've heard from like Missouri and Arkansas that
Yeah.
pediatric cases are on the rise. And here's the thing: this time of year typically is not a time of year when kids are super sick. But what I'm hearing from my friends who are doctors and respiratory therapists and nurses is that wearing masks actually really protected our kids from things like the flu and
Mhm.
colds and RSV, pertussis, all these kind of things that maybe kids haven't had vaccines for, that we don't have vaccines for, and suddenly masks are off. People are getting together again, which was good. Like we thought that was a good thing, but there's been a real rise in things like RSV and croup and flu, and it's July. Like this is not peak respiratory illness
Right.
season, but there have been an increase in COVID cases. And we have children in Oklahoma who are in ICU who are on vents with COVID, period. And
Yeah.
it's preventable.
It is preventable, and it's terrifying because open up the Washington Post, New York Times today, flip on CNN, and you're starting
News
to
junkie. See, you're a news junkie.
yeah, that's on 3 screens. Uh, but there's stories on the front page of all of those websites that are indicating that this is starting to affect and attack children. We talked about it last week with Dr. Schmidtke. Children are the largest unvaccinated population in the country just because it's not been approved for use yet. And, I'm sitting here looking at an article right now about a mom who's got a teenage daughter, a young daughter who was unvaccinated, who's on a vent right now in ICU fighting for her life.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I'm terrified for our children. I'm pleading with anyone who is unvaccinated. Please, please get the vaccination. It is safe and it is going to save your life possibly. And
And
so,
it's going to slow the spread too.
yeah,
And
it is.
it's very tricky right now. I think as a mom, you and Missy got to hear some of my irrational, what do I do sort of
Well, Autumn,
situation
let
with.
me let me just ask you this because you're bringing up a very important conversation that's happening across dinner tables and in living rooms all across this country right now. Here we are sitting at the end of July. In many states, schools will open in the next 2 weeks. Others at the end of August, 1st of September. And with the trending that we're seeing right now, with the uptick in the Delta variant cases, there are some school systems, some states have passed laws that restrict any kind of mask mandate by public schools. Um, what are you and Josh talking about right now? What do you think you're going to do when they open up the schools and masks aren't required? Encouraged, but not required.
Well, now they're encouraged, right? Since the CDC came out. It's very frustrating. I had a moment where I said, is my 8-year-old, does he weigh enough that I could pass him as a 12-year-old and just go ahead and get him vaccinated? I have
Right?
these
Sure.
moments. I'm not going to do that. I don't condone that. GFM does not condone vaccinating people under 12. Um, but I did stock up on N95 masks for the kids, and they wore them all day yesterday at the museum. And unless we were outside and sort of away from others, and not one complaint. Like my kids are champs at mask. I also wore an N95, so we've been practicing with that. I'm pretty concerned about the cafeteria situation. There'll be like 200 kids eating, and obviously you have to take your mask off to eat. So that's one time when my kids can't be masked up, and I'm nervous about that. I'm hoping that they're going to follow some CDC guidelines instead of governor guidelines on that,
Right.
and just having to, have faith a little bit. It's very scary.
And again, it's also infuriating because this is unnecessary. This
Mhm.
could have been prevented if adults would have got the damn vaccine. It would not have spread this quickly or mutated this quickly. Probably would have mutated, but if people get the vaccine, then it prevents the spread of this virus. But because people have refused to get it, it has spread and been transmitted quicker than ever before. And we're seeing this begin to attack a younger population and move into children. It still can be stopped, but
Mhm.
people have to get the vaccine. So if
And
most
wear a mask,
and wear a mask,
you know?
absolutely, absolutely. And for all of our listeners, I think most of our listeners have been vaccinated, uh, but every one of you, as well as Autumn and I, have family members and friends who are skeptical about this vaccine.
Mhm.
Please make one more pitch to all of those people
Yes,
that
yes, I've had an ongoing conversation with someone who's in my life who has contact with our kiddos, and they had some health concerns and had talked with the doctor. And so I think I've just about convinced her to get her vaccine. And it feels good. Like it feels, I'm like, at least one person I've convinced. So, we still need to be telling people about the love of Christ. Like, let's still like have that as our mission, but like, can we like side gig? Let's be vaccine evangelists too.
I agree wholeheartedly. Well, another component of this pandemic has been an economic
Mm.
crisis. And for a long time, there was a moratorium on evictions, on foreclosures. Those moratoriums are coming to a close now. And there's some concern by social experts about the rise in the homeless population. And I think it's a real legitimate concern. You and I sat down this week with the executive director from Food and Shelter for Friends here in Norman to talk about what Food and Shelter has done here locally, but also talk about some of the national trends that she sees. So, April Heiple is our guest this week, and Autumn and I had a delightful time talking to her, and also a little bit of frustration because of the blowback that she gets for simply working with homeless people. It was just kind of eye opening to hear some of the things that she has to encounter by morons of this world. But they're doing good work, and it's and hopefully you can find a homeless and food shelter in your local area to volunteer at and to offer some supplies that they desperately need. So stay tuned for this interview.
I'm Jenna.
I'm Ashley, and we're Reverends.
Revs on the road. Hop in the car with us and come along for the ride.
As we step out of the pulpit and see what God is up to in the world,
We're not leaving the church.
we're just finding it in all kinds of beautiful places.
Revs on the Road, a podcast from Good Faith Media. We travel the country
From the comfort of our place in Dallas for now,
and catch up with beautiful people doing God's work, advocating for disability rights,
healing from church hurt and spiritual abuse,
promoting mental health and the power of community,
integrating spirituality and art,
working for racial justice.
and so much more.
We've got red light rants, pit stops, and detours.
Faith is a journey, and we're on it.
So ride along with us
The Revs.
on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Revs on the Road. I'm Jenna,
And I'm Ashley. We're Revs on the Road.
a podcast from Good Faith Media. Learn more at goodfaithmedia.org.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly, and on this episode, we've got a very special guest from our hometown right here in Norman, Oklahoma. April Heiple is the executive director at Food and Shelter here in Norman. April has over 18 years of experience in both direct service and administration of nonprofit organizations. Food and Shelter's mission is to feed people who are hungry and help those living homeless make their way back home. It was founded in 1983 by a group of compassionate church members from McFarland United Methodist Church, led by Harriet Lee and Catherine Selman. Food and Shelter was built by a loving community and is supported and sustained by volunteers, community givers, and donors who believe all people deserve a home and meals to eat. April, welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
So your mission at Food and Shelter sounds like it would be pretty basic. First of all, from like a human needs standpoint, from a Jesus standpoint, but we know from
Hey,
just
Autumn.
living-
Now, Autumn, come on. Right from the beginning, you're going to throw Jesus into the mix here.
like we're a faith-based organization or something.
All right,
No,
proceed.
you're
Sorry.
saying we're going to feed people and give them homes, which I feel like it's exactly
I
what
think
you
I've read that.
said.
I've read that somewhere in some
Somewhere.
book.
I mean,
Okay, go ahead.
I'm not going to cite my sources, but probably the Bible. So in 2019, Food and Shelter served over 180,000 meals, prevented homelessness for nearly 250 households, offered day shelter and outreach services, and provided case management for people. It sounds like a lot of work. So then 2020 happened. How did the pandemic affect your work?
So, first of all, when people are struggling, living on the street, struggling with food insecurity, it's really difficult to try to get those things through Zoom. And so, Food and Shelter didn't have the option of closing down, reducing services, or really working from home. So, we were frontline workers just like everybody else. We opened every day of the week, our normal hours. We extended our service hours so that all the extra people struggling with the economic crisis that came with COVID would have access to meal supports, food, and also case management services if they needed rent paid or something like that. So, when the pandemic started, people were just afraid, like the fear of the health worries and what might happen. And so we all felt that too. But very quickly, it became clear that people, particularly people who were already on the poorer end of our economic spectrum, were going to be affected differently, not just in a health crisis, but their income really just went away in the blink of an eye. If you work an hourly job, you don't have paid leave. You really just stop working. And all it takes is one paycheck for those folks to go from doing okay to not doing okay. And we started to be flooded with those phone calls, the scared mom who wasn't sure how she was going to feed her kids, and the elderly grandparents who've been raising their grandchildren who's got an eviction notice without any wonder how they were going to pay those bills. So we did. Our work grew and grew and grew. We were seeing 500% and 600% increases in phone calls, just day to day to day. And then just in the month of June and July alone, we fed nearly 10,000 people. So the pandemic did affect the poorer segment of our population just in a very different way than most of us experienced the pandemic. And really it was through our partnership with United Way and friends in the community that helped us be able to meet those needs, because otherwise, Food and Shelter is just a small organization without our community supporting us. There's no way we could have done that work.
Yeah. April, one of the things I think the pandemic revealed was that, and we have said this, I've said it over my career, we said it here at Good Faith Media, about how close people are from homelessness and being very insecure. And I think the pandemic revealed that, and just the increase in your work. I mean, 500% increase in phone calls alone tells us how kind of unstable our society really is, and that any of us are very, very close, one or two paychecks away from needing those services. It's just paramount in our community.
Yeah, absolutely. We all say that sentence a lot. So many people are one paycheck away from homelessness, but the pandemic caused 2,000 to 3,000 workers to lose their paycheck at the same time. And to have a community rally behind those folks was really important. So we feel really blessed to have been able to be part of it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about COVID-19. We're not going to dwell a whole lot on it, but it had to be difficult. I mean, here we are. Your work is difficult enough. You're working with a community that's mobile in a lot of instances, but are needing to congregate to receive services. We're talking about an airborne virus. What precautions did Food and Shelter make? What educational strategies did you have for your clients? Because here at Good Faith Media, it was difficult enough to try to convince people to wear a mask and social distance, and we've got all the technology in the world. But how did you serve your community during the pandemic through education and just modeling it for them?
So, we, like everybody, learned a little bit of information every other day about the COVID pandemic. And as we got more information and learned what the science told us, we tried to respond the best that we could. But you're right, this community that we serve, those who live on the street, those who live in shelters, are a congregate group, and they're used to being together, and whether they're being together at their campsite or they're being together here at Food and Shelter. And so to ask them to stay away from each other was like saying, go be by yourself or leave behind your family. And most of them said, there's no way we can do that. So we tried to understand who our community is and meet them where they are. Um, we still provided meals every day. We tried to do as many of those things outside as were possible so that our guests would eat in a safe manner. But still, we know they needed to come in and take showers. We know they needed to come in and cool off because it was in the heat of the summer last year when COVID seemed to be rising. For people who were vulnerable, we were able to book motel rooms and keep them kind of isolated. And that was one of our most important strategies, because there are a number of people who are homeless who have severe chronic health issues that I believe would not have survived had they gotten COVID. But the building of our shelter, the way we built our shelter here at Food and Shelter, we have tiny little houses. So everybody gets to kind of isolate by themselves. And so we didn't really envision a pandemic when we decided to build a tiny house village for shelter. We really were looking at what's the most humane way to provide people homeless shelter. But it did help because our residents and our guests here could really isolate off to themselves in their own family structure, and that helped really reduce the spread as well. We were very fortunate. We never had a spread of COVID within the homeless community. We never had a spread of COVID within our staff or within our residents. Another thing we did, we reduced down our volunteers. We kind of understood that if COVID were to come into the homeless community, it would probably come from outside and not within each other. So we really were trying to just educate them about staying out of public places, wearing their mask, washing their hands, doing all the things that we want them to do that we all were trying to do ourselves. But when they don't have homes, it's kind of difficult to keep up with all that stuff.
Yeah, and I've got a question. I've got a question about the tiny home village because it is really cool. So I want you to talk more about that later on. So, but I think we got another question about the pandemic.
Yeah, so we wanted to talk a little bit about the vaccine rollout. We've had lots of epidemiologists on the show talking about the vaccine. And, in the beginning, it was, wait your turn. We're going to let the most vulnerable folks go first. And now it's like, please give us your arms. Let's hurry this along and get everyone vaccinated. Can you tell us a little bit about the strategies that you all are taking to help people living, in these sort of migratory patterns sometimes be vaccinated?
Yeah. So we were fortunate that both the health department and Norman Regional Hospital came out and offered clinics here at Food and Shelter specifically for our staff, our volunteers, our residents, and our guests. So I was first in line. I said, I'm going to get vaccinated, and I want you guys to see me get vaccinated because I want you to know it's safe. There was a lot of hesitancy in our early clinic where people were just kind of worried. They heard all the silly things that people say on social media and on the news. But for the most part, we had a lot of participation. We had, I would say, about 50% of our community vaccinated within the first 2 clinics. And then just recently, we've been doing a lot of new education as we've seen the rise in this Delta variant and a new urgent need to get more people vaccinated. So we're trying to create some educational opportunities. We've got posters about the safety and the science behind the vaccine around our campus here. So hopefully at our next clinic, we can reach a lot more of those people.
April,
And I feel for them because you don't end up in that kind of situation without having some situations where you were done wrong, where you were deceived, where something went awry. And so that mistrust is, I get it, especially in that sort of a vulnerable position. So good work.
yeah, absolutely. Now, hopefully, I mean, obviously, you mentioned the Delta variant, and it seems like there's an uptick now in cases as well as hospitalizations. But everybody's hoping that we're not going to return to where we were last winter, summer and winter. But there's some other things happening that affect your client base. Eviction moratoriums are starting to lift all across the United States. Many experts are wondering if this is going to lead to a rise in homelessness in the country. What are you hearing about all of this? And are you preparing at Food and Shelter for a potential rise in homelessness?
So this is probably the biggest worry on my heart right now, because we take the phone calls after the phone calls after the phone calls of moms and dads calling us and saying, we haven't been able to pay our rent. We got behind. And though we're trying to pay a little at a time, once you get 3 and 4 months behind, we don't make enough money to catch up like that. And with the eviction moratorium in place, most of our federal grants wouldn't allow for us to pay out assistance. So there's so many people put on hold, just sitting and trying to wait for what's going to happen. And it's really my big concern. And through talking with our partners at Legal Aid, who've been doing a lot of work on this eviction moratorium as well, that once that lifts, we're going to see a tidal wave of evictions filed. And in Cleveland County alone, it'll probably be close to 1,000.
Gosh.
And so there's a couple of things happening to try to prevent some of those from going through. The city of Norman is putting together some community development block grant funds that will be able to pay up to 6 months in the arrears on rent and utilities. So we're hoping to get a lot of those folks signed up for that. But at Food and Shelter, we know that there will be people that are evicted, and it will probably be a lot. So we have just put an application in for some federal assistance to provide emergency shelter to those individuals and families who find themselves homeless, and also to provide some rehousing assistance. And the rehousing assistance will help them get moved back into a place. It can pay their deposits and the first month's rent. And if you've moved recently, it's an expensive thing to move.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're living paycheck to paycheck, saving money for a deposit on an electric bill and a deposit on an apartment is really nearly impossible. So to be able to get them moved back into a place pretty quickly, that's going to be our strategy here, is to try to rehouse them as quick as possible. It can be difficult because once they've got an eviction on their record, a landlord's going to say, I don't know, this might be a risky situation. So we're hoping that there will be just a general understanding and some compassion that we've all just been through a crisis, and some of us weathered it differently than others, but too many are still struggling economically. And the rippling effects of that, I think, we haven't even seen yet.
And Food and Shelter has taken, I would say, an unorthodox angle to homelessness in our community here in Norman, which I think is just lovely and beautiful, and it's just a great thing to see. In many cities you see homeless shelters, but you've got this tiny house village that is absolutely remarkable. And just could you tell our audience a little bit about the tiny house village you have there?
Yeah. Oh, I love this place. Yeah. So we call this village McCown Village because the McCown family helped us design and build the village. When I went to my board and our partners within the community who were going to help us build a new shelter, I said to them, I don't want to build just a big dorm where people can all cram in together. I want to build a place where every child who's homeless, who comes to live here, tells their friends, I'm going home. And they walk into a little house and they put their book bag in their living room and they go sit in their bedroom and they feel like they are home. And that's really what the inspiration was, is because I can imagine what it would feel like as a mom to have to take your child into a homeless shelter, into that kind of situation. And I just wanted everybody to feel the dignity and the love and the support that your own four walls can give you. And so when I first pitched this idea, everybody thought, that's the most insane thing I've ever heard. It's going to be expensive. There's no way to manage it. And then my friend Richard McCown started looking into the design of tiny houses, and he just got real excited, and he found a way to build this really beautiful little campus where all the cottages look a little bit different. They all have their own front porches where on any given day, you're going to see neighbors out there sitting on their porches, talking to each other, kids playing basketball on the playground. It's just become its own little community. And when the people move in here, you can see the sense of pride and love as they get to move into their space that's theirs, where they can cook their own meals and feed their children at the kitchen table. And when they leave here, they leave knowing they always have a home they can come back to. And people who support them and love them, neighbors that have become their friends, they share holidays with. It's just a really special place.
I love what you just said about you wanted someone to be able to say, I'm going home. And shelter work is great work. It's needed. And we appreciate every shelter out there that provides, warm and cool place for people to stay. But these little tiny houses it's a step above. You guys have raised the bar when it comes to reaching out to your community and serving your community. So I just love it. For anybody who wants to know more about it, they can go to foodandshelterinc.org and find out more about this incredible program here in Norman, Oklahoma.
So let's talk about homelessness in general and your work at Food and Shelter. There's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding concerning homelessness. What are some of the most common ones that you hear that you'd like to clear up? We're giving you a microphone.
So I think the most important myth we need to dispel about homelessness is that people become homeless because they're mentally ill, or people become homeless because they're addicted to drugs or alcohol, or people become homeless because they've committed crimes. So you and I, all of us, everybody listening, probably know people who have committed crimes who never became homeless. We all know people who've been addicted to drugs and alcohol who've never become homeless. And we know people who have mental illness that have never become homeless. And the difference is that some people have financial or familial resources to weather them through that storm. Mm-hmm. The people we meet don't. They don't have money or family to keep them from falling through the cracks or going down a path that none of us would want for any of our friends or family. Homelessness is an economic issue, and it can only really be solved with economic solutions, resources that go into housing, resources that go into wages, resources that go into programs to provide jobs and support services for people who are struggling with these things. And that's really the biggest myth about homelessness is it's real easy to say, oh, if only they stopped using drugs or alcohol. But that's not what got them here. The people I have met here at Food and Shelter over my 11 years are people who were very, very poor as children. They were already very poor. Their families were very poor. They were homeless as children. It's a generational poverty issue that we face in Oklahoma because we don't have a lot of supports or resources to lift people out of poverty. And that's really something we are trying to do here at Food and Shelter is give people resources, opportunities, hope that they can lift themselves out of these situations. That's probably my biggest one. The other thing that we hear in Norman right now, this is kind of is that people come to Norman to be homeless. And, we just don't see that happening. When we meet people who are homeless here, the first thing we do at Food and Shelter is get to know their name, get to know who they are. And we ask the question, where did you live when you found yourself homeless? And the highest percentage, 97% of the people we meet say, Norman, I was living down here. I graduated Norman High School. I graduated from Noble High School. I was living in Lexington. These are our neighbors. And like I said, they had a crisis, whether it was a lost job or a divorce, or they made some bad choices. And what fragile floor they had underneath them fell out. They need our help.
Absolutely. And you guys are doing that at Food and Shelter. Um, one of the things that, or one of the trends that we are currently kind of keeping our attention on is this backlash against the homeless. There seems to be more rhetoric. People are more emboldened to speak out against the homeless. They're wanting to, get rid of them. As you said, there's kind of this misconception that the homeless are from other. They're not part of this community. They come in and live here and then use all the resources. It's always this otherness, this dehumanization of the homeless. Are you seeing an uptick in the backlash against homeless population?
Absolutely. That's been the most disheartening thing I've experienced in all my time at Food and Shelter. It's hard enough to see people who have no other choice but to sleep on the ground, but now to see these people demonized or dehumanized because maybe one person had a bad experience. Overwhelmingly, the people who sleep outside are good people. They're good, wonderful people who deserve an opportunity to lift themselves up. And the conversation where, because you're homeless, you are a problem, or you're making this community worse in some way because you are sleeping in the park or downtown or in a campsite somewhere in town. I don't understand. I don't know where it's coming from. It's not the Norman I've always known and loved. And it's my hope, that through some conversations and dialogue and prayer that we can shift that conversation back to remembering that regardless of what got somebody into homelessness, they are all children of God. They are all born children of God and deserve the love and support that we would send to any one of our friends or family, people we love.
And you don't have any reasoning behind this uptick in the backlash?
My opinion on it, and this is just speculation, is that it got caught up in politics. Because homelessness should not be a political issue. I mean, homelessness is many things, but it should not be a political issue. And, I was taught at the youngest age that Christ says we care for people who are poor. We love people who are poor. We feed them, we clothe them. And in feeding them and clothing them, we're clothing Jesus Christ. We're feeding Jesus Christ. And that's what I've always believed. I think homelessness is not a political issue. But in Norman, the political culture has become so divided between two groups that if one group likes something, the other one has to hate it. Mm-hmm. And our people, real people, my friends, are now pawns in this political conversation. And I would hope that everybody would understand the importance of bringing it back to a human conversation.
Very well said. It's been a big concern here at Good Faith Media for a long time, and Autumn and I have talked to several guests about the hyperpartisanship that has trickled all the way down to the city level now and the community, and how we have basically isolated ourselves based upon our political persuasions. And I've said this before, and I'm about to say it again, whether it is an African family in West Ghana or a family here in Norman, poverty and disease and viruses do not care who you voted for in the last election.
Right.
These issues are far above our political discourse. These are human issues, and they speak to what kind of society we want to be. Are we going to be a compassionate, loving society that cares for one another? Because as this pandemic has taught us, as we've discussed already, we're all a paycheck or two possibly away from needing these services. And when we dehumanize these people and treat them as the other, it's a horrible, horrible spiral that we're heading down. We've got to understand that we are a community. We are in this together, and as we've already talked about, I mean, Jesus modeled this for us. I mean, he lived among the people. He welcomed all types into his presence and embraced them and loved them and gave them resources and sent them on their way. And so we need to do that ourselves. And I'm so glad that I live in a community where food and shelter exist, and people like April Heiple are doing God's work out there in the community.
Yeah, so, what can people of good faith do to help their local food and shelter programs? Folks in Norman, folks, across the U.S. who may be listening to this, what are the greatest needs?
So we always need volunteers. We're about to construct a new food and resource center that's going to make lifting yourself out of poverty just a little bit easier. Actually, it's going to make it a lot easier for people to get out of poverty, because we're going to provide them not only access to food, but access to important resources like DHS benefits, housing supports, veteran services in one location. So nobody's having to spend their last $5 driving all over town to access care and support. So it's going to be predominantly volunteer run. So we're always going to need people to come in and sit alongside us and share space with struggling people, share space with people who are poor, share space with people who have to sleep on the street. And, coming here and being present and being a smiling face to people is often the most important thing we can do, is just to give somebody encouragement that they can take big steps and find their way back home. So volunteers can find all the opportunities on our website, foodandshelterinc.org. Just click get involved and you can register yourself. It's got a calendar of events. It's pretty simple. We love, love, love volunteers coming in. We always need community support, whether it's goods or financial support. We keep an up-to-date list of needs on our website as well. Our food pantry is very, very active still. And we're trying to make sure that the people that come to us always have a week to 10 days worth of food when they leave, so they can always have food at home to feed their families. We try to give personal choice as much as possible. So if somebody has a specific diet or they're from a different culture, they can let us know that and we can serve them. So anything you'd feed your family, we need here at Food and Shelter. And then our other needs right now are really related to personal care and hygiene for people on the street. We give out a lot of socks, as foot care is really important when you live all your life outside. Hygiene like deodorant, toothbrushes, shampoo, things that help people who have no other choice but to live outside feel just a little bit better. All that stuff can be brought to Food and Shelter. Our address is 201 Reed here in Norman, and we're open every day of the week. And then, you mentioned the village earlier. I love to give tours of the village. I love for people to come and see how our shelter works, not only because it's a really pretty place and the cottages are really cool, but also we get to share the human story of the people that live here. And
I love that.
You get to know the human story behind homelessness. It's harder to believe the internet rhetoric. So I would love for people to come and really get to know the human story behind Food and Shelter.
So at Good Faith Media, our tagline is "There's more to tell." You've already told us a lot. It's so valuable. But what would you like to leave our listeners with? What is your more to tell?
So we've talked a lot about the community conversation going on in Norman right now, and how some of the very negative things have impacted people who are homeless. Some of it's been really ugly. Like, we've had people come to Food and Shelter just to verbally abuse our guests. I've heard from people who've been woken up where they were sleeping with somebody kicking them and disparaging them for being a deadbeat. So there's becoming real life consequences to online social media rhetoric. And, I've prayed a lot about that, tried to figure out what is it that I can do? How can I be a voice for these people who feel like they don't have a voice? And I decided I wanted to turn to our faith partners. I believe that faith is at the center of what we do here at Food and Shelter, even though we're not necessarily a church or a faith organization, but faith is at the center of what we do. So on Thursday, August 5th at Andrews Park here in Norman, we're hosting an event, just a peaceful event to share support, scripture, prayer, words, to try to unify our community again around an issue that, regardless of how you feel about homelessness, the solutions are all going to be the same. We've got to provide places for people to sleep, beds, homes, food, support. None of us can live without that stuff. So the next part of the story, I think, is going to be come together to remember that people who are homeless are humans. They're children of God, just like I've already said. So join us if you can at Andrews Park on Thursday, August 5th at 7 o'clock. It'll be a wonderful, lighthearted, peaceful, faith-filled event.
Yeah, I'm planning on being there. April's extended an invitation for me to say a few words there that evening. I'm honored to do
Just
so.
a few, Mitch. A few.
Yeah.
I might get him to sign that. I don't know. I edit him weekly, so.
Hey, I don't need you saying all that. But no, it is going to be a great event. We love being a part of this community, and we love every aspect of our community. Beautiful people who live here and reside here and call Norman their home. And we need to embrace every part of our community. And that's what we're going to be doing on that Thursday night at Andrews Park. So I'm just happy to be part of it. And we're going to be there. We may ask you to do an on-camera interview for us, April, so everybody can. They've heard your message, but they need to see you and to see what is going on with Food and Shelter here in Norman, Oklahoma. April Heiple, thank you so much for being with us at Good Faith Weekly.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor to talk to you guys.
Thank you.
For our listeners, we want to thank you for tuning in again. Until next week, and Autumn and I return with another fabulous guest. Just remember, keep living good faith.